So the question is, should we anthropomorphize AI? And what does that mean for education? This is a big topic that's only going to grow as far as its importance in academia. So let's get right to it with a special guest star that will help us to understand what this all means and what we can do to help address it. Hello, everyone. So, as always, I'm very excited for what's going on this time, and we're very fortunate to have a special guest star on the show today. So, we have Mike Kentz, who is a very multi-talented person in that there's lots of things going on here. So, let me just start off by saying, welcome, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, yeah. So this is an exciting topic in general, and I really appreciate the diversity that you have in your background. In that you've been a high school teacher, you've been a news reporter, you've worked with. Let's see, I have it all written down. You've been a writer, and now you're a CEO and founder of your own educational advisor group, Zane Tech. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Just about only about 4 to 6 months in now of trying to, act as a professional development provider and resource provider. But yeah, I've bounced around a lot. I kind of like to keep things fresh.
Mhm.
I think it keeps you young to change, and
Right.
so I've tried to do that for the last 15 or so years.
Great. Well, that's important because I think that offers a great, unique perspective on this topic. So I've brought you on the show to talk about AI in education, but then specifically talking about anthropomorphizing AI, right? So can you please explain what that even is and why it's even an issue?
Sure. Yeah, it's a really controversial topic, but it's also kind of very much at the front or at the very front, yeah, the very front of discussions around how to teach AI literacy or how to teach
Mm,
students about AI. And anthropomorphizing essentially, or it literally means to treat AI like it is a human. So treat it like, turn it into a human in your mind. And that is a really controversial thing for a lot of different reasons because AI kind of lives on this continuum between, sort of mimicking a human but not being a human. And also, it's very much not like any of the technology that we have. So it doesn't fit into the category of technology and it doesn't fit into the category of being a human. And so the question that a lot of educators have is it better to lean more towards the human side or is it better to lean more towards the technology side? And there's great arguments on both sides. And I think what we're doing now is in this question trying to figure out that middle space, what it looks like and how to talk about it.
yeah, and that's key, right? You talk about this middle space because for most of the my interactions with people in general and face to face as well as online, there's been a lot of people that focus much more on this idea of, hey, you shouldn't anthropomorphize. Sorry, that's a complicated word in itself that makes it complicated to talk about, right? But the idea here of most people is saying that we shouldn't put these human values, these human aspects on the AI because it's not really intelligent, right? Then you go into this whole debate about what is intelligence, and then this whole area of, well, if we treat it like a human, then we give too much agency to the AI, and we need to retain the agency because it's not a real thing. It doesn't fully understand, it doesn't comprehend, doesn't have a consciousness. So no, you shouldn't do this. But what I love the video that you posted, and I'll show a clip of that here. The video that you posted because you're taking a much more middle ground about some positive aspects of actually doing that. So can you explain that a bit more too?
Yeah, sure. Man, this is a long topic. We could talk about this for a long
Oh
time.
yeah.
I'll lead off though with what the subject of my video, which was this concept of, well, part of the subject of the video was this concept of stranger danger. And I used this when I taught my students last year about AI. And what it essentially is, it leans more towards anthropomorphizing AI, because of course, if we talk about a stranger or stranger danger, we're talking about a human.
Hmm.
And so what I told my students is you can't really approach this like a technology, like your TV or like your phone or like your car, because it doesn't act like that. However, to your point about the risks of anthropomorphizing AI, it's also not a good idea to actually think it's a human. So we need to have a certain amount of skepticism, criticality, a critical eye that we bring towards every interaction we have with AI. And I thought, what analogy could I use to help people understand that, help my students understand that? And I think this concept of stranger danger goes a really long way because we know not to automatically accept or believe or act on something that another human being says. Even your closest friend, right? Your closest friend says something, at a certain point in life, you recognize that it's your job to take that information, consider it, process it, digest it, and then make a decision on your own.
Yeah.
And yeah, sorry, you look like you're going to say something.
No, that made me think that that's exactly right because what I've found is that there's lots of people that look at AI because it's a computer much more like an oracle, right? Like, oh, it's always right, it's always perfect. You want the answer, go there. And I think some students are thinking that way because to get answers to a lot of different questions, they'll go to the AI. But the danger with that is that it's not a perfect being. It's not some holy entity, right? It's exactly like what you're saying. It's like a person in this instance, in that it could be wrong. It could be hallucinating. It could just get the facts wrong. So I really love that comparison. Yeah.
Yeah, and to go to your point on technology, technology as we know it prior to large language models always produced binary outcomes.
Mm.
So if you flick on a light switch, it either works or it doesn't, one or zero, right? Either the light goes on or it doesn't. You have immediate proof as to whether or not that technology did what it was supposed to do. You turn on your car, the engine either starts or it doesn't. You change the channel on your remote, one or zero. It either changes or it doesn't. To your point about using AI, we enter in a prompt and it shoots words out. And because we've never had a technology that is sort of non-binary in nature in terms of the products that it produces, we see those words and we automatically assume it worked, right? It did what it's supposed to do. It produced the thing it was supposed to do. But the truth that you and I both know is that those words might not actually be correct, or they might not actually be useful. They might not actually be valuable. And that is what makes AI so confounding for us. Our brains are, I would argue, are just simply not ready for this because we've never had something that, to what we talked about at the beginning, lives in the middle.
Mm.
Um, and I always like, when I do workshops, I like to enter a prompt into AI and say, okay, everybody, I'm going to press enter and I want you to tell me whether or not it worked. And then you press enter and it produces words and everyone kind of stops and goes, I don't know, which is exactly what you want people to realize. You don't know whether or not it works until you process and you digest, and then you ultimately, to your point about agency, make a decision yourself. And that's complex, that's hard to teach.
Yeah, and I love that emphasis, right? Because now we're talking about human in the loop. So making sure that we are taking that information and then processing it, which is part of what I teach when I express AI literacy, right? This critical thinking aspect that we always have to have this critical awareness of making sure that we're thinking about it and understanding it. Now, to complicate things even more, we've been talking very much about this text input and this text output. But now, of course, we have AIs that have the power of voice. I made a video about that a little bit ago that talks about how I really like it because now I can have my students go through, let's say, a simulation. I have them go through a simulation where they're interviewing someone that's in their field, right? And this is a practice interview that they do because then they have to go out in real life and actually do an interview with someone in their field that they don't know. So, it's very
Yeah.
stressful. So by going through this simulation, this practice with the AI, they get to reduce that stress because now they have experience with it. And what I really like about using the voice, because I've had them use text before, but in using the voice, man, it's so much more realistic. You have an emotional connection because the voice is so realistic. So now the person's talking and I'm talking to them and it feels very realistic. So that really increases this emotional connection. But at the same time, now we can run into the aspects of maybe overusing it or over reliance. There's a new term now called emotional reliance, where some people are using the AI in this excessive way. I hesitate to even say excessive, but they're using it in this different way where now it's a more sort of friend relationship because it's emotional, because I can have a connection. So now it's much more human-like in my interactions and relationships with the AI.
Yeah, I think this is the slippery slope argument, and that is a very good argument. Everybody that I've debated on this, when I have debated people, I always try to acknowledge that there is absolutely a great deal of risk in telling a young person to treat it more like it's a human. Because to your point, and it's already happening, there was an article, I don't know if you saw it from The Verge, they're doing great coverage on this that talked about students who are using character AI, which
Oh
is much
yeah.
more, much
I
more of
made a
an,
video about that one too. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And it's much more of an emotional connection to those bots because they really try to be a human being. They're not like an assistant bot. They're actually trying to pretend like they're a character. And there are students who are talking to therapist bots on character AI
Yeah.
and then, believing the diagnosis of the bot. And it's like, wow, that's really risky. And there are people, to your point, well, there are people who are developing friendships, even, sort of amorous relationships where they say, I'm in love with my bot. How can you can't tell me what I'm in love with? I know what love is. And that's going to get really, really thorny. And I think just to kind of summarize or loop it back around, when I say, hey, I think we should anthropomorphize it to this certain small degree in this nuanced way, people immediately respond, rightly, that's a really slippery slope
Right.
because what's to say that a student, they start treating it like it's a stranger, but then 3 months later, they've developed a certain trust with it. They start to feel like I don't need to treat it like it's a stranger. I know this bot now, and that's a really, really interesting, odd place to be, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, there's lots of interesting aspects to that. And when I watched your video, it really made me think, and I gravitated directly to the voice aspect of ChatGPT, right? And it made me think of a feature that they had come out with the new implementation of their voice that kind of it made me think about the class that I teach. So I teach professional communication. And one of the recent classes that I taught was active listening. And in active listening, it's very important that we present ourselves in a way that we are actively focusing, paying attention. And the first step is not to talk, right? Not to talk over each other. But the interesting part is that in the new voice feature, when the AI is talking to you, you can hit a button to interrupt it, to make it stop talking and then you talk. So that right there would sort of violate some aspects of how we really want to treat humans. So if we treat our AI more like we should be treating a human, well, then that will help our skills in the real world. So you see the complexities of this really escalate on multiple different levels when we think about it. So yeah, there's a lot to this.
Yeah, the interesting part about what you just said is there's no consequences to being rude to AI.
Right.
Right. There are
Right.
social consequences if you and I are in conversation and wherever, right? And we jump on it, we step on each other's toes, we don't listen. There's a consequence. You're probably not going to want to talk to me again. You're probably not going to want to hang out with me again. And then I don't have friendship. I don't have a companionship. And so we learn these conversational skills to your point, because when we interact with other human beings, we sort of learn the rules of the road. Listen, don't overtalk, however you want to think about it. But that's really concerning with AI is like you can interrupt it whenever you want and it will never get tired of you and it will never be rude back to you or it will never walk away from you. And so I just to go back to your point about using it as a practice ground, I did the same thing with a Holden Caulfield bot where I asked them to show active listening after we read The Catcher in the Rye. And it kind of worked, but then I realized, when I'm not around, they could totally step on this bot's toes and nothing would change. And
Mm.
so, yes, really concerning. It feels like it could be a practice ground, and then you recognize, oh man, there's just aspects of this that are not really accurate.
Yeah, and again, that gets complicated and interesting because so there are lots of different groups, companies that are coming out with different AIs. They're still using foundational models, but they're putting new wrappers around it so that it could function as a boyfriend directly, no facade there, just directly as a boyfriend that would retain these different aspects. So it would be closer to you and act more friendly if you have been acting nicely to it, and it would remember certain things like, oh, that was a bad interaction, so now I'm less talkative. So that kind of teaches you to develop these skills. So it could be a benefit, right? It could be really helpful in that way. But at the same time, one of the real powers that students have in using AI is their agency to learn on their own because it is such a powerful tool. And part of that power comes in being able to ask the AI anything, to ask it questions that I don't feel comfortable asking the professor maybe, or I already asked the professor, he gave me an answer and I don't want to go to the professor again. She explained it to me nicely, but I didn't understand. So I like talking to the AI because it never judges me. So
Yeah.
if we add a judgment aspect to the AI, well, then that kind of defeats one. So I see there room for multiple different types of AI. It's just really interesting, all the different aspects associated with this idea of making a human-like AI. Well, in the same way that we have different social connections with different people, we would probably have different connections with different AIs.
That's a really good point. It's a really good point. I think for me, the first feeling I get when we start talking about developing a bot that can judge and
Mm,
can break apart from you or disconnect from you emotionally, quote unquote, is fear. Honestly, I get afraid when I think about that. It's very difficult for me to view that
yeah.
in an optimistic lens. And
And I
that,
agree. I mean, I agree
yeah,
on
yeah,
some aspect, but there's a huge market for it, huge
right.
market for it that existed even before ChatGPT, right? You have Replica, that's one company, but there's more that are developing, and there's a big need for this. And especially again, I don't want to cast judgment on anyone who uses something like that, but you have different scenarios, different situations. You have lots of Asian countries that are suffering from issues of people that are held up, that have severe anxiety of different things. So this might be a tool to help with that, to help deal with that. But again, it has to be implemented in the proper way, right? And that kind of leads me to another important question that I wanted to be sure to ask you, Mike, and that deals with I've given a couple of different presentations about this and videos as well, and I talk about how it's very important for academia to be aware of this, right? To be aware of this new technology, of human-like technology, in order to help our students understand these things. Because, yeah, if you and I have never been trained on this type of thing, for sure they haven't been. So, what are some things that you might recommend that could help with preventing sort of a negative or an improper relationship with an AI that an instructor might be able to at least discuss with students?
That's a really fascinating question. I think that's kind of the million-dollar question in the AI literacy world right now. And one thing that's sort of high level, but it sort of answers your question. A lot of folks, including the people that teach AI, the consortium of different organizations and educators who are trying to figure out how to teach this, are working on is breaking down AI literacy, which is this concept that is so big, right? It's
Mm,
very, very difficult to wrap your arms around because it includes so many things into our existing disciplines and figure out, okay, what does it look like when we're teaching it in the context of STEM versus humanities versus history versus philosophy? And that's something that I've been thinking about a lot. And in that context, I like to think of safe and effective use, which you could teach to your students. I think it's a mistake to view this as like we're coding with language. A lot of people use that phrase. I don't particularly agree with it. I don't think that's correct. Language does not behave like numbers. And it is really a mistake to imply to people that you're coding with language because coding is inherently logical.
yeah.
It's not something that you feel your way through. It either works or it doesn't. Going back to this binary, non-binary thing, language is non-binary. You have to feel your way through it. You have to use your intuition. You have to use your presence of mind. And it involves, as you talked about before, communication skills.
Mm,
And so I taught my students prompting as a reading and writing skill.
mm,
You know, you're writing prompts and then you're reading answers, you're close reading the same way we would close read, I was a high school English teacher. Same way we close read a page or two from To Kill a Mockingbird, we close read the output from AI.
right.
Now, our goal is different, right? Our analysis window is different. We're trying to determine different things, but the same mental skill, the same cognitive skill is being attached to that. And so just to finally really answer your question, I think removing that cloak of sort of the technology STEM approach for your students and saying, hey, you actually have the skills to interact with this the right way if you've been taught reading and writing on a deep level, and most students above a certain age have. let's tap into those skills because you know how to do broad to narrow, you know how to include context. So that's like, I view that as sort of step one.
Yeah, yeah, and that makes sense to me too. I mean, the big thing is to, at the very least, have a discussion, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not just keep this as, oh, this is a secret thing behind a closed door, but to bring it out, to talk about it. Like, hey, have you
Yeah.
heard of character AI? A majority of students use it, and
Yeah.
it's interesting that a majority of students use it in the research that I cited in one video. It's like the second or third most used AI out of all the AIs, which was really surprising to me for students. So, and most instructors don't even know about character AI. So that's an important thing too, to simply have a discussion, to talk about different cases, to situations. One thing I recently read was this thing called Dan. I don't know if you've heard of this, but this is basically it's a boyfriend that this Chinese lady was using, right? And it's an AI. Dan simply stands for do anything now, which is a jailbroken aspect version of ChatGPT. And so by doing that, by using that system, she was able to then sort of change ChatGPT to act like her own boyfriend. So this was in the BBC. It was an article. I'll link that up. And it's an interesting implementation, but then that would showing that article to the students might open up an opportunity to then have discussions, have critical thinking ideas, to pose ethical questions to one another. So I think there's a lot going on that we can use to help students understand, well, what would be the consequences of this? Would it all be good? Is there possible negative aspects? To hit at these things to really make students think. So I really like the way that you broke that down for prompt engineering because that's the way that I express it too. In that I tell them that, hey, prompt engineering is simply the skill of being able to ask proper questions.
Right.
And this is a skill that translates to professional communications as well, right?
Right.
In that when I ask somebody brand new, let's say after a conference, or I just go up to somebody, I don't just ask a question. I explain the situation. I give context. I ask for their viewpoint. I explain it with some more specifics. So that's prompt engineering to ask a more appropriate question.
Yeah.
Really good. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Asking good questions, couldn't agree more. I think a lot of people are coming around to that now, and you're there already because you're a communication person, right? And I'm an English teacher, and I
Right.
think, when I have conversations with humanities folks that have been kind of thinking about this, they are there. They've
Mm,
gotten to that point where it's like, I don't need to think about this as coding. I know how to ask good questions. I know how to include context, and I'm sort of repeating what you just said, but I think the average user is not at that place. I think the
right.
average user is still thinking about it more like technology, more like coding, more like pressing a button, which
Yeah.
you and I know is not really what's happening here.
Yeah.
And so getting that message out is something that I'm really committed to because I think that's where we need to get.
Yeah, yeah, again, it's those things about going. It's the pendulum, right? Because we're talking about asking a good question, as in a conversation, which is a very human-like thing,
Yeah.
which is what we're talking about. So, yeah, there's a lot going on here. Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Mike. If the people are interested in contacting you, or maybe even scheduling a meeting to talk about some of the consulting services that you offer with your company, what is the very best way to get a hold of you?
I'll give two. I know I should give one, but I'll give two. The
Right.
website is zaintek-edu.com. So it's ZAINETEK-edu. And if you're wondering where that word came from, it's an anagram of my name and AI.
Nice.
A lot of people are like, "Where's that? What's that all about?" So there's ways to communicate with me there. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can book a free consultation right on the website. There's also lots of information,
Great.
videos, free downloadable PDFs. And then the other way I would say is LinkedIn and Substack. I'm very
Great.
active on LinkedIn, and my Substack is mikekentz.substack.com. Subscribe, you'll see all my thinking. I try to post at least once a week. So
Great. Well, we really appreciate your time, Mike, and I think this is an extremely important topic that will continue to develop as AI continues to get more and more lifelike with more capabilities. The multimodality aspect is just going to go through the roof. So this is really an important topic. So greatly appreciate your time, Mike.
thank you. This was really a great conversation. I feel like we could do probably 5 episodes on this one topic.
Totally good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed this very interesting interview with Mike Kentz. Special thank you to him for giving us his time and understanding and expertise. It offers a very interesting perspective in the importance of looking at different things that will be happening with AI from different viewpoints and also trying to have this balanced approach as to what it means, because it's going to be complicated. It'll always be complicated. But the more that we're aware of these situations, the more that we understand and can think about it as far as how can it be beneficial, what might be some dangers, what we can do to help the situation overall. And I think that Mike really helped us to understand that. So I appreciate you viewing this. Please like and share, subscribe, help as many people understand these different concepts so that we can continue to develop our community of inquiry. And remember, learning is for life.